copy of a copy of a copy of a copy copy. Deja vu.
Deja Reviewed.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Deja Reviewed podcast. I'm sorry we had a little bit of a hiatus, but the holidays and life kind of caught up with us for a couple weeks there. But we're back, and we are talking still about the original versions of TV shows that were later rebooted. This is season 1, which we're calling In the Zone because we're discussing the Twilight Zone. I'm Michael.
And I'm Mark.
And today we're talking about season 1, episode 9, titled Perchance to Dream. And Perchance to Dream came out in 1959, November 27th, 1959, directed by Robert Florey, written by Charles Beaumont, and starring Richard Conte, John Larch, and Susan Lloyd.
There is a fifth dimension.
Both shadow and substance of things and
Suddenly up ahead.
Just cross over. You're moving into another dimension.
Next stop, the Twilight Zone.
Okay, so here's Rod Serling's voiceover from the beginning of this episode. 12 o'clock noon, an ordinary scene in ordinary city. Lunchtime for thousands of ordinary people. To most of them, this hour will be a rest, a pleasant break in the day's routine. To most, but not all. To Edward Hall, time is an enemy, and the hour to come is a matter of life and death.
Oh, very good. And the description from IMDb is, a fatigued man fights to stay awake as he explains to a psychiatrist, this is funny to me for some reason, as he explains to a psychiatrist that if he falls asleep, it will trigger a nightmare, which will cause his heart to fail. I don't know why I find this one so funny.
That's pretty much what happened in the episode.
That's about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I have not much to add to that summary, other than there's a little bit of a setup at the beginning where we see the main character, Edward Hall, sort of outside this building, watching people going in and out of sort of skyscraper building. And then he goes into an appointment with the psychiatrist, takes a really long time beating around the bush before he finally explains his problem, which is he has a weak heart, and he's been having these recurring nightmares where somebody, the lady with the cat face, Maya is her name, or Maya the cat lady, I forget what they call her.
It's Maya.
Yeah, she had some subtitle in the carnival. I'm sure we'll get to that. Anyway, where he meets her in his dream, and she is trying to excite him, take him on these carnival rides into the funhouse and stuff, which is going to cause his heart to fail. And he's afraid if it fails in the dream, he will also die in real life. And so most of the episode is him explaining this problem. And then there's kind of a couple twists at the end. First, he finishes explaining and gets up and goes outside and sees that the receptionist actually is Maya. So he goes back into the psychiatrist and is freaking out, and then hurls himself out the window. And then the twist end is we sort of see the psychiatrist again looking calm, and the camera pulls back and we reveal that Mr. Hall is actually laying on the psychiatrist's couch. He had fallen asleep and now actually has died in his sleep. So the whole thing we were watching was sort of his dream. And that was the twist.
Just to add a little bit to that. So the reason that he cannot sleep and basically can't stay awake, he had a rheumatic heart, which I had to look up, which is a very rare thing to happen and can come from inadequately treated strep throat or scarlet fever. So, and in addition to that, apparently he developed a very vivid imagination. So he's looking at a painting of a ship in the psychiatrist, Dr. Rathman's office. And he's like, have you ever seen that ship move? And the doctor's like, no. And he's like, when I was a kid, my grandma or mother had one. My mother had one like it. And she'd say, like, if you stare at it for long enough, you can make it move. And he eventually stared at her for like an hour and made this thing move. And then he couldn't rein back in his overactive imagination, which was kind of the whole thing. So that's why his heart, he basically scared himself to death.
Yeah, and the overactive imagination was an interesting thing. There's a scene, this is actually several layers of it's a dream within a dream, and then within that it's like a flashback, where he's talking to the psychiatrist about this time he was driving like alone at night on this dark road, and he says, intellectually I knew I was alone, but I heard this news story and like just really had this fear that someone was in the back seat. And he keeps like looking at the rearview mirror, and he's like, and I knew my imagination would like make it show up. But he's doing nothing to try to stop it. Like he's literally driving down the street, just staring in the rearview mirror, like kind of willing his imagination to make this thing come and scare him.
Yeah, he was making it far, far worse by also not paying attention to the road when he was willing his imagination. And eventually,
well, and interestingly, this was Maya shows up, which is weird because she doesn't show up in the back seat. It's like this extreme close up of eyes in the rearview mirror. Wasn't this also? Correct me if I'm wrong, Mike. This was after he had been diagnosed with the heart condition, and he's in this sort of car accident, and then the doctors sort of say, like, yeah, that was a real stress on your heart. If you have one more sort of exciting, not in a positive sense, but it was one more episode, then you're going to die. He seemed like he was pretty lucky to get out of that alive in the first place because his car, like, gets totaled.
It seemed like he had many very terrifying experiences in between that and the time he and by the way, jumping out a window, I learned this from Comedy Bang Bang, he defenestrated himself before he jumped out of that window from his psychiatrist's office, which he didn't technically do. He did in a dream, which eventually scared him to death. But it seemed
and he technically jumped through the window too, which was pretty. He like takes a running dive and like smashes through the glass. And I'll get a little credit to the writers here that they had set up when he first shows up in the psychiatrist's office. He goes and is like, I need some air, and like opens up the window and like looks down and on this high floor of a skyscraper. And actually, I was thinking there's this great shot of him looking down, like his POV, looking down and seeing the people way down below. And I'm like, they needed this shot in Escape Clause when the guy's at the roof of the building and looks down and sees his wife had jumped. They needed that shot, and they didn't have it there.
I'll tell you who I won't give credit to is whoever cast the stuntman, because it is so hilariously. So Mr. Hall, Richard Conte, or whoever, Richard Hall, or Richard Conte played Edward Hall as the character, is allegedly, at some point they mention his name at 35 years old. So I would significantly younger than the two of us. This guy was ridden hard and put away wet through his entire life because he looks like an old man. Maybe we look like old men. I don't know. But
well, times were harder back in 59.
Yeah, true. But the stuntman is like looks absolutely nothing like him, and you can see the switch when he runs and jumps out the window. But that was
it was still a pretty good stunt for a Twilight Zone episode.
For sure.
I mean, he dove through a window. So anyway, what I was gonna say, when he looked down the first part, they had sort of set up this idea because the doctor comes over and like, oh, let me close that. He's like, you afraid I'm gonna jump? And he's like, well,
yeah, it's a good idea to basically close windows up here.
Maybe if you're a psychologist seeing insane people who want to kill themselves, you shouldn't be based on like the 50th floor of a building with opening windows.
That's true. Or maybe
that in itself seems kind of weird. Like I don't know if OSHA was around back then, but I don't think they let you have windows that high up just open all the way these days.
Right. Yeah. No, I don't think. Definitely, they don't. So I thought that's before we really kind of launch more into the discussion. I thought this was kind of an interesting tidbit because I thought this episode was super weird and super creepy. Richard Conte, who played the main character Edward Hall, was in The Return of the Exorcist, which kind of had a similar. Well, I've never seen Return of the Exorcist, but I assume it had a sort of eerie feel like The Exorcist did. And John,
it's actually a comedy. It's a series of sketches. It's kind of like an extended SNL episode.
And then John Larch, who not only reminded me of Gene Hackman, but he played the doctor, Dr. Elliot Rathman. He was in the Amityville Horror. And I saw, and I bet that's where I either recognize him from Dallas. He was apparently in Dallas. My parents always used to watch it, and so I would see that a lot. The old Dallas. Or the Amityville Horror is where I assume I recognize that guy. Or maybe because I felt like he looked a lot like Gene Hackman. But I thought that was kind of neat. We had someone for I think the creepiest episode so far, someone from Return of the Exorcist and someone from the Amityville Horror were the two main characters.
That's fair.
I didn't look up.
I didn't think of the guy looking like Gene Hackman, but now that you mentioned it, you kind of did.
Right?
I wanted to throw out something we did in some of our early episodes and kind of gotten away from a little bit. as we've changed the format, was I was kind of doing predictions of where the episode was going to go as I watched it. And I wanted to share one thing as I was making my notes. So at the first commercial break, which is about 4 minutes in to the 24-minute episode, I wrote, okay, he's scared of something that'll happen to him if he sleeps. And then I was kind of guessing like he either had a premonition or maybe something that was in a previous dream that he was scared of. I ended up guessing either that he'll have to go to sleep and then what the twist will be, whether his premonition comes true or not, or based on the Twilight Zone sort of liking irony, maybe trying not to go to sleep would be somehow it makes the premonition come true. But here's my point. It was very clear early on that his issue was he's scared of something happening to him if he sleeps. And that was 4 minutes in. And then the bulk of the episode, probably like the next 15, 16 minutes, is just delaying him actually saying what he thinks is going to happen. So we've talked about this in some other episodes where, sometimes they keep the plot moving very quickly and like they're staying ahead of you, and sometimes things seem dragged out a little bit. This one I felt, and this doesn't mean I disliked all the parts of it. I think there were a lot of parts that were well done, but in terms of just the plot itself, we knew the plot, and then they kept like just circling around. He would almost say something and then would launch into another sort of side note. And I was just like, just tell us what you think's going to happen if you go to sleep. Like, we know that's what's coming. And this felt really drawn out to me.
That's fair. That's fair. And to be clear, I don't know if we mentioned this when we were kind of summarizing it too. He also mentioned that I think you did say that, in kind of a catch-22. He couldn't stay up too much longer because his heart would give out just from lack of sleep too. So,
right. I think he said he hasn't slept in like 4 days and nights,
yeah,
which is approaching. Hours. I don't know what the record is, but it's somewhere like, I want to say somewhere between a week and 2 weeks, like the longest anyone has actually really gone without sleep in a controlled setting.
You teach at a college. You should know what this answer is. It's certainly one of your students.
I teach at a college. I know the answer to everything.
No, I just mean certainly it's a college student during finals.
No, it's some like radio DJ did it as like a stunt and basically like permanently screwed up his brain. I remember seeing a thing about it.
People die from that.
But that's kind of the point. Like at 4 days and nights, it's not just his heart. Like you're pushing the limits of kind of how long you can stay up without suffering some sort of serious damage.
I mean, like every couple of years, someone dies in an internet cafe in somewhere in Asia because they've stayed up playing League of Legends for like 4 days or something. Like it's a real. I mean, you guys go to sleep. Don't go to sleep. Well, maybe we're putting you to sleep with this episode. So if you've been up playing League of Legends for 4 days, just throw on this podcast. You'll be asleep in 20 minutes. How do you not know you're not asleep already? Like Ed or whatever his name was. Richard, or no, whatever his name was. Ed Hall. It was Ed Hall. So Mark, something you mentioned early on that I really actually kind of liked initially, I think the way that this was shot was, and I want you to fill in the gaps on this. I thought it was kind of neat though. I feel like they were very deliberately trying to give us a sense of what Edward was feeling. Like right off the bat, there's like a shot where he's going to go into the building where his doctor is. And he gets caught up by, almost hypnotized by like the revolving door going around and around. And it's a surreal kind of twisty. There was a lot of like shaky camera and like blurred edges of the shots in this, and some like really uncomfortable close-ups. You mentioned the cat lady's eyes in the rearview mirror. I felt like there was a lot of that going on that I thought was a neat premise, but I think in actuality made me very uncomfortable, so I didn't like it very much.
But maybe you're supposed to be uncomfortable
probably
watching this. Yeah, I would agree that sequence you mentioned at the beginning when he gets hypnotized by watching people going through the revolving door was fantastic. It's this sort of fast-cutting, shots of their feet, shots of the door sort of revolving, cutting back and forth with like a tight close-up of him, and really kind of puts you in his head there. And I made some notes throughout. I thought this whole episode was actually shot very well and interestingly. It's kind of a challenge when the bulk of your episode, and I know there, we see some of the flashbacks, we see some bits where he's explaining his dream, we're seeing the dream, but the bulk of the episode is just in this doctor's office with two characters, it's really easy to get visually boring there. And they found some really clever ways to shoot things. I'll point to two that I thought were kind of cool. One was when the doctor first brings him over to the couch to lay down towards the beginning, and then we find out at the end that he laid down on the couch and immediately fell asleep and died. But in this, as we're seeing it, he lays down and talks and then gets up and talks some more. When the doctor brings him over to the couch, the camera's kind of like looking at them, and then as they come over to the couch, it goes booms upward and looks kind of straight down on him laying at the couch in this wide shot, which is something you don't usually see in a TV show. It's like a movie shot. Really kind of expanding that space there. Sure. And the other one I liked was kind of the first time he's explaining part of his dilemma to the psychiatrist, although of course not actually getting to the point. It's a two shot with the doctor on the left and Hall's on the right, and just kind of keeps them both in the shot, but Hall just kind of paces backwards and forwards towards the camera and away from the camera. And it's really smart. It's visually dynamic and interesting because he's moving forward and backwards, and there's this constant sort of energy to it that fits his character, but also sort of super easy to shoot. Like, you lock down the camera in one spot and you've got both of them in there, and that's that scene. So I thought the shooting throughout this was quite good.
It's funny you say that this was, essentially two characters in a room, which is true. I also got the impression that this felt like a much bigger cast than most Twilight Zone episodes. And also this will tie into something I also wanted to say, that one theme that we've seen in the Twilight Zone is everyone in 1959 is super, super helpful. When he's like kind of hypnotized by the revolving door, some older guy like immediately is like, "Are you okay, buddy? Are you feeling sick?" But there's all these there's like the carnival barker, there's the cat lady / receptionist, there's like it felt for some reason like and even just like extras, like all the people milling about in the city street when he looks out the window, all the people like dealing with the revolving door. It felt bigger cast wise to me than a lot of episodes we've seen so far.
No, I totally agree. And it felt not just like there was a lot of cast, but also there were like it felt like significant parts, like significant roles, whereas a lot of the Twilight Zone episodes are really sort of one person carrying the load, and then there's a couple people kind of acting around them who appear in one or two scenes, and that's not universal. We've seen some other ones with some larger cast, but this one, it felt like there were when I think back on it, I'm like, well, it was him and it was the psychiatrist and it was the cat lady are really the only ones with significant roles, but it felt big as you're watching it. And again, we've seen this in the last couple episodes that I think, I don't know if the Twilight Zone at this point was a hit. Maybe we should look back at the history and they started upping their budget, but it feels like they're just able to do these at a higher level than they were in the first few episodes.
Well, I don't know a whole lot about how TV works, but I'm assuming they probably, and especially not back then, but I would assume they probably got bought, or like a certain number of episodes got bought, right? And I assume that number is more than 9. And they just, I doubt they I doubt it mattered that, I bet this episode was already shot when at least, 4 or 5 or whatever were coming out. I would assume. I don't know anything about television though.
I don't know how they did Twilight Zone, but a lot of TV, and particularly in that era, would come out fairly quick. I mean, it's not like they're shooting it and airing it that week, but I would bet that some episodes had already aired by the time they were shooting this. I mean, you're right. It was probably bought for a full season, so maybe it wasn't I don't know, but something clearly changed in the production. Like maybe they just got better.
Yeah, could be.
Maybe they started getting some better directors involved or something. I'm not sure, but the last few episodes we've seen have been executed at a higher level and with more production value and more apparent budget. So either the budgets went up or they were spending their budgets a lot smarter.
Well, if it helps at all, Roger Flory, who is the director of this episode, also directed later on an episode of The Outer Limits. We're going to see that he has done we're going to see a couple more episodes of Twilight Zone directed by him. Okay. I can't really see what he's done very easily prior to this, but he's got a lot of 114 credits as a director, so
He's doing something right.
Rough Riders, Goodyear. I don't know if any of these ring a bell. Schlitz Playhouse, Studio 57. He directed an episode. He's a pretty renowned, it looks like, TV director. The director for a couple episodes of The Magical World of Disney. So that you might be onto something there.
Well, I thought this was well done. I wanted to note, kind of while we're still at the beginning of the episode, before we get into the dreams and stuff like that. This reminded me somewhat of Escape Clause, and not in the sense like Edward Hall seems like a bit nuts, but he doesn't seem like a total jerk like the hero of Escape Clause. But they're kind of parallel, right? You remember Escape Clause opens with the doctor telling him it's psychosomatic, just in his head. And here Edward Hall specifically brings that up. He says, the mind's everything. If you think you got a pain in your arm and there's no reason for it, it hurts just the same. He's suffering from the same kind of sort of imagined affliction, but imagined enough that he's really dealing with it, that he's really feeling it. And that seemed like a callback to me. Again, when we've watched 100 episodes of this, I'm sure there's going to be lots of things that remind us of other things, but it's interesting to me that even in these first few episodes, we keep seeing themes and conditions that crop up multiple times within the first few episodes, which I think tells you something about what Serling was interested in. And this is, you could imagine this guy kind of doing something similar to Escape Clause. Like if the devil showed up instead of a psychiatrist and I can make sure you don't die in your dream or whatever, maybe he would have signed that deal. But this went a different way with that same premise. Yeah.
And kind of piggybacking on that, I had took the note that this is a very metaphysical episode. I feel like, that it was very, I feel like they played with us a little bit more on this. And I know that I kind of agree with you that this kind of was felt like maybe one of the worst of the one trick pony kind of punchlines, but I think it did do a pretty good job. But I wasn't necessarily expecting and I'll take a little issue with it as an improviser. I was not expecting it's all a dream, end of it. So I do feel like it kind of did, even though maybe you could argue that was just beating around the bush, did one of the best jobs of any of the episodes so far, not telegraphing so obviously what the ending's going to be and kind of hiding what the ending was actually going to be. I was a little surprised the first time I watched it about the ending. Maybe I'm a moron, but
no, I would agree with you. I think the fact that it was all in his head did turn out to be that very last beat turned out to be a surprise. But it took a long time to get there with the actual details of like I said, 4 minutes in, it's not even me guessing. It was like he's afraid if he goes to sleep, something's going to happen to him in his dream and he's going to die.
Yeah.
True. And then they take another 20 minutes to continue to explain that before he actually does die. And then we get the final twist. But I think you're right that the end twist that it was a dream, whether you like that as an improviser or not, was a surprise. And I also think look, it's the Twilight Zone. I think you would expect that at somewhere along the way they're going to have an episode where it's all a dream, and if that was their twist and everything, that would be horrible. But they, a lot of these episodes have all different sorts of twists, and that's one they were going to use at some point.
Yeah, and I will clarify, I'm only annoyed as an improviser because I feel like when you're making stuff up on the spot, it's just kind of cheap to be like, it's just kind of like a wink at the audience, like, we're just being silly up here because it's a dream. When you actually are sitting down and writing an episode of television, you're obviously not doing that. So of course I give it a pass on that.
Well, although there's still I would still say that's one where you want to make sure that actually felt set up.
Yeah.
And in this case, the thing I think that makes it less obnoxious than it might otherwise be is that the plot of the episode itself is about dreaming.
Yes,
so
for sure.
It's not like it's just a dream is a completely out of left field.
Yeah.
I'd like to note quick that I thought even though I said it felt stretched, and it did in terms of the plot, I thought the dialogue writing was actually quite good. And even though I was waiting for plot information, they were saying interesting things, and you could imagine this have been really dull and really feeling stretched, but what they were saying at any time was interesting. It just was peripheral to sort of the main through line. And so I thought that was well done and a better way. I think the last couple episodes have been, I think I've used the word chock full of plot a couple times, with just a ton happening. When we sort of do the recap, it's like, well, it was this and this and this and this, and just like racing through all these things. And this one, there was not a lot of plot, which harkened back to a couple of the very early episodes where they were sort of one-trick things. And, the very first episode, where is everybody? We established at the beginning, nobody's there, and then he wanders around for 20 minutes, seeing still nobody's there before we kind of get the twist at the end. I thought this might have learned a lesson from some of those earlier ones I thought it found a better way to keep things interesting, keep giving you new information without giving you the sort of core information you needed for the plot to move forward.
Yeah. And I would just caution you to be careful about saying early episodes, the earlier episodes, because we're 9 episodes into 500 and something. So we are still technically in the very early episodes. With that, should we take a quick break and come back and keep talking about this episode?
Sure. Sounds good.
Okay, we are back. One thing that I was feeling, and I kind of alluded to this in our first half, Mark, is how uncomfortable this episode made me feel. And this is the creepiest episode we've seen so far. Would you say that that's accurate?
I gotta think back over the others. Yeah, I would say so. Like a lot of them are weird or have like some, I think the one with the Lonely, where the guy has the robot
sex doll
wife / girlfriend / whatever it was as he was imprisoned on an asteroid, that had some really dark implications, but the episode itself was not super dark.
Right.
Like, I think you're right. This is the creepiest in terms of the actual episode and tone.
Yeah, because and just some examples, like the Maya, in one of the dreams, she's trying to bully him into going on, like toward the end of the episode, she's trying to bully him into going on a roller coaster in his dream. Mm-hmm. And she's like very weirdly yelling at him, like in a very, and she did, I will say, I should have mentioned this before, kind of to your point about the dialogue about in this entire episode being good. I do think the acting was good, like was solid all around from the 3 main players, Maya and Edward and the doctor. But man, was she creepy when she was trying to convince him to go on that ride. And then I mentioned this earlier, it was shot very shakily, and there were those blurred edges and all the close-ups of the eyes it was a very creepy episode. And then kind of to that point, I think this is the first jump scare we've gotten out of the Twilight Zone, right? Because Maya and Edward go into a fun house, and there's like a couple straight up jump scare, or it's intended to be a jump scare moment, like some like ape like statue comes flying out of nowhere, like and even when her eyes kind of appear in the mirror, the rear view mirror of the car, I think this is the first that I can recall of the 9 episodes that we watched so far that whether they actually have tried for a straight up jump scare.
Yeah, and that felt a little, it worked within the episode. I think it fit the tone they were going for. It's something that kind of in the abstract feels off-brand for Twilight Zone. Like, that's not the kind of scare they're going for.
Yeah, it's more creepy and unsettling, and frankly, there was some straight up very unsettling imagery in that funhouse. Like some of the like things that were supposed to be coming out and scaring Edward were I thought very modern looking in how creepy that they were. And to be on TV in 1959, I thought was kind of interesting.
Well, and Maya herself, so it's Maya the cat girl is what the sign said, which is very strange. She's at some sort of, I realize it's in a dream, and in dreams things don't need to make sense, but he's at some kind of a carnival or fair, and there's like a girly show there. Like she's out dancing to try to get people to go, in and I assume see like more exotic dancing or more scantily clothed people. And that felt kind of weird. But Maya, the makeup on her was fantastic. Like she looked creepy and she looked totally human. It wasn't they were trying to like make her like look like a cat, like let's draw some whiskers on her or something. But like the makeup had this weird like cat effect to it. Like I'm like, yeah, that looks like a cat girl. I don't know what a cat girl is, but I buy it. And that I think added to the creepiness. It was this very non-real world look to her.
I'm so glad you mentioned the carnival, because in my notes here I have, what in the world was happening at this dream carnival? Because the Barker he's like, we got all types of girls, blondes, brunettes, and then the cat girl comes out and does this sexy dance, and I was like, there's like a roller coaster over there. There's like a merry-go-round. It was very weird. And like you said, even in the dream, I get that it was a dream that this was happening in, but even in the dream state, it was a super weird carnival experience. So I'm glad you pointed that out as well.
I was like, what the? I don't know what this carnival is, but it was.
And where is it?
It was
more
something.
importantly.
Yeah. And you were mentioning in the funhouse and the shooting kind of across the board. This was, I think, of the episodes we've seen thus far, this was the most visually stylized. Like, there were, particularly in the dream segments, just a ton of things that were not shot to look in any way real and really sort of foregrounded. There's even some like German expressionism in some of the shots in the funhouse where the camera's like tilted and there's these very hard shadows of things like shooting at weird angles.
Yeah.
And it's, all the rest of the episodes. And I think part of it is because they're dealing with, often there's something strange about the concept. Either the devil's there or we're out in space or whatever. And so they're shooting them and performing them and doing the production design in something attempting to be realism to kind of ground it. And in this one, that's really the first time we've seen they kind of were willing, at least in the dream segments, to totally let that go and go way off the deep end in terms of the stylization, and very clearly not intended to look real.
Yeah. I truthfully don't have a whole lot more to. I think you're right off the bat. This was a pretty simple episode. Like, it was a simple episode that I wasn't super like captivated by, and also we've had some time off, so I've watched it like 4 or 5 times to remind myself.
We should have taken time off at a time like with a really interesting episode that
this is a bad time for
watch
it.
10 times. Why don't we move on to our next segment? I don't have a whole lot more to say about the episode itself, and honestly, spoiler alert, I don't have a whole lot to say about the modern applicability, but I think there's at least a couple of things we can mention.
Let me give you the closing narration that then Rod comes out at the end and says, this is as you're kind of panning away from a shot of Edward dead on the couch. One thing I do want to mention before I forget, right off the bat, because having watched this a couple times in the past couple of weeks, I was like, wait a minute, isn't the receptionist the same person? Because she's Maya. So he walks in, and I will say they kind of pre-thought about this, because Edward takes a very long look at the receptionist, kind of a confused long look at the receptionist when he comes in, and the camera shot is from behind her desk and behind her back, so we don't see her. So, like, I do think that they kind of tried to account.
Oh, that's smart.
I think they kind of tried to account for the fact that, like, if someone did watch, I don't know if reruns were a thing back then. Oh, wait, I'm thinking Back to the Future. So there weren't reruns back then. In 1955.
Well, that was 1955.
Well, okay.
Maybe between 1955 and 59 they started.
I know when Back to the Future was, but yes. But I was...
Well, I was going to say that raises an interesting question, because we would assume... So it is when we see reality again at the end when he's dead and the psychiatrist calls Maya in to look, and it does still look like her. It wasn't like he just, in his dream, she looks like this. But he saw her eyes in the rear view mirror before he ever came to the psychiatrist. So it's like so there is this kind of interesting question of either he's been going to the psychiatrist before, but it didn't seem like it. Like, it seemed like this was their first time meeting, and yet he already sort of knew what Maya was going to look like. He had that vision of her in his head, or that it is some sort of like intentional. I mean, obviously it's intentional in the episode, but that the idea is that, like, this was some sort of premonition that he was going to see her. And
I think this leads me to probably the only interesting thing I'm going to say about this episode, because I just realized she might not have looked like Maya when he walked in because he was awake when he walked in. He fell asleep on the couch, and technically when he walked back out and saw her again, he could have just transposed the cat lady, whatever the cat lady's face.
No, but she looks like Maya when he's dead, and she comes back
good
in
point.
the psychiatrist like he died here. So she really does look like
Good
that.
point. Good point.
By the way, we're like 40 minutes into this podcast, and you just said this is going to be the only interesting thing you said, which we've now spent 40 minutes apparently saying not.
We're only 35 minutes in, and you could have been saying interesting things. I'm not holding you back from saying
But
that.
I wasn't.
Okay. Well, then let's... Did I already say the... No, I didn't do the closing narration yet. Okay.
Do the closing narration, and then I want to say something about the closing narration.
Okay. So Rod comes out and says, they say... He doesn't come out, but they say,
He like walks out on screen.
He did that for the first couple episodes, didn't he? I feel like we saw him on screen before, and I haven't seen him on screen in a while. Anyhow,
I don't
start
remember
paying
that.
attention to that. I feel like we used to see him. Maybe I'm misremembering, but I think we did. So Rod says, they say a dream takes only a second or so, and yet in that second, a man can live a lifetime. He can suffer and die, and who's to say which is the greater reality, the one we know or the one in dreams, between heaven, the sky, the earth, in the Twilight Zone. And scene.
Very nice.
Thank you.
The part about the dream only taking a second, but you can live a lifetime, and then the psychiatrist himself mentions that because he says, he just laid down like a second ago, and now I guess his heart stopped when he calls Maya back in, or whatever the receptionist name is, who looks like Maya. One of the things I think we've been pretty good about on this podcast is recommending good movies to people. And
well,
this,
I have. You haven't.
Fair enough. I'm going to recommend horrible movies from now on. This obviously reminded me of Inception and the idea of the difference between dream time and real time, and kind of as they go deeper and deeper into the dreams, a second becomes, an hour, becomes a day, becomes a week, and so when they're in the bottom layer, you can live years in there, and it only takes a second of real time. Anyway, that I thought this was an interesting, it's not foreshadowing Inception in any way, but an interesting use of that same dynamic, which I think Inception plays with in a really smart way. And I will say, as a vote for that movie, my department was trying to put together a list at the end of last year, end of 2019, for what were the best movies of the year, and then what were the best movie of the 2010s as that decade was ending. So trying to think of the best movie of the decade is super tough because I don't even remember all the movies I've seen in a decade. I had kids in 2011, so half that decade is just a blur of not having slept. So anyway, I was trying to think, and I looked back through the best picture nominees for there, not because that's the end all be all, but I was okay, at least this will remind me of some of the good movies from that year, and or from the decade. And I said Inception, and I probably if I went back and thought about every single movie I've seen in the 2010s, there's probably better things, but certainly I think that was one of just a really great feat of filmmaking and a really interesting concept executed really well. So that's one I highly recommend to people. I thought it was super entertaining and really clever, playing with the idea of dreams within dreams within dreams.
100%. I mean, my very top note under modern applicability is that this felt very Inception-y. And
well, crap, I've jumped us ahead to the wrong section.
No. I don't really feel like that necessarily has to do with modern applicability, but something that, excuse me, something that made me think of that. And I'll hold that thought until we actually get to modern applicability, because we run a tight ship on Deja Reviewed. It's such a tight ship that we've missed 2 weeks.
Ship that we always go 20 minutes over. I think we're drawing to the end of just discussing the episode. I wanted to add one minor thing, because you were talking about when he first comes in and takes a long look at Maya, or at the receptionist, and has this reaction where I thought that's really observant of you that they were sort of setting that up there.
I told you it'd be the only interesting thing I said.
Something I thought was really clever is the sign on the door says Elliot Rathman, MD, and obviously he can be an MD, but I wouldn't necessarily think of that as if you're a psychiatrist or psychologist, that when you see MD, you first think internal medicine type, right? as opposed to like a mind doctor. And I thought that was actually a really interesting production design choice. And maybe in the 1950s, I have no idea, all psychiatrists were MDs. So I might just be revealing my ignorance of history here. But I thought that was smart because when he's first coming in, we think that there's something physically wrong with him and he's like sick or some crazy physical thing has happened to him. And it like let them extend that a little bit longer. Because like, oh, of course, he's going to a doctor. And then it lets them save the reveal a little bit later until he actually starts explaining that it's something going on in his head. And I just thought that was a clever little bit.
Yeah, and I think that they could have that anyhow. I do believe, because they did say he's a psychiatrist, I think psychiatrists are MDs because they can prescribe drugs, right? So I think psychologists...
Well, I need to get to a psychiatrist then. Excuse me, I'll be back.
Psychologists don't necessarily have MDs, I think, if I have that correct. I'm sure all of our listeners will call in and yell at me if they're probably yelling at their podcast applications right now.
If you're a psychiatrist and listening to Deja Review,
what's
then,
wrong with you? You should not be giving people advice about
send
their
us
brains.
a tweet and tell us the correct information. Also, did you notice he has 2 telephones on his desk? One was white and one was black, and there was like no explanation of that. I just thought it was weird.
Oh, we probably should have explored that, but too late.
Oh well.
No, I didn't notice that. I wonder if that's a dream thing.
Last thing I want to share. I talked about how I like the dialogue. I want to share one line that I just love, and this reminded me, not because it's the same line, but it's the same sort of like just really snarky comment from the secondary character as in Time Enough at Last. You remember I mentioned I love the thing where the bank president is like, unasked, I offer my opinion.
Yes, that was a great line.
What's this thing when he's like, okay, promise you won't put me in a straitjacket, and the doctor goes, I don't promise anything.
There's been some really kind of funny moments in the last couple episodes. So sweat level, Mark.
I'm gonna say this was not a 1. This was
agreed,
but it was pretty low. I would say maybe like a 2.5. It starts out with no sweat.
I'm making the call. You do not get half levels on the sweat zone anymore.
We've already given halves before.
Fine.
You can't retroactively unhalf me.
Fine.
Well, because it's not all the way up to a 3, but I feel like it's higher than a 2.
I said between 2 and a 3 as well.
Yeah. All right, so there. How about here? You can say 3, and I'll say 2, and then it averages 2.5.
No,
let's say give a half.
Let's say 2 because most of that sweat happened inside a dream.
How does that make it any different?
I don't know. But
he does start sweating as it goes on, and he gets like more worked up. So it was sweat that felt reasonable that it was happening.
Yeah, he was like nervous sweats and like night terror sweats.
Well, and they also established at the beginning, so he opens the window, and then the doctor's like, "Oh, if you're hot, I'll like turn up the air." So maybe it was hot in the office. So. Okay, so fine, I'll go 2.
Cool. All right, we'll take that.
Just to placate you.
Solid 2 of 10.
It's really a 2.5, listeners, but we're just saying 2 so that Mike doesn't get his panties all in a bunch.
Oh boy. All right, so modern applicability, I've already kind of mentioned what you started with it, and I completely agree with you that this is has an Inception kind of theme to it, and to piggyback a little bit on that, one of the most interesting things in my mind that science fiction explores is that idea of time. You know, we mentioned the Time Enough at Last, literally. I mentioned that episode of Black Mirror with John Hamm in it, where like that there's a really good Stephen King short story which explores there's this portal that they make to another dimension, and they can't figure out like all the inanimate objects they're putting through are fine, and like they come through fine on the other side, and they start like putting back halves of mice in there, and the back half comes out fine, but then when they put the whole mouse in there, or they put it head first, it comes out like super beat up and like really aged, and then like dies right away. And so finally the guy who's working on it's like, we got to figure this out. I'm going to volunteer myself. Spoilers for like a 1982 Stephen King short story. I forget the name, so just read them all. And he goes through.
You're spoiling the plot, but not the title.
No,
the title is the secret.
That's the surprise. The guy goes through and he comes out looking like a very old man, long fingernails and like long gray hair, and scratches his eyes out and dies. Like, and right before he dies, they're like, "What's in there? What's in there?" He's like, "It's eternity," because like I guess they just go through that. The wormhole feels like forever to them, and that's what dreams, and that's what Serling's closing narration says, and that's what dreams feel like. I mean, you'd go insane if you felt like you were sleeping, 6 to 8 hours a night. that would be horribly boring. So it's a good thing that we can kind of, even if you don't dream, that time just kind of jumps for you in unconsciousness. So that, I think that's kind of a neat modern, whatever. I feel like that's a relatively, I just read the Stephen Hawking book, one of his Stephen Hawking books that talks about time as a fake construct and all that stuff anyhow too. The other movie, maybe you can guess this, Mark, I'm not going to make you guess it. The other movie that this kind of hearkened to me is
it the movie The Twilight Zone?
No. It's a movie that I thought was a little bit overrated, but this had a very Matrixy questioning of what reality is, because like
The Matrix,
yeah, like there was a very these what is a dream, and are like, there's always that talk of like,
wait, you think The Matrix is overrated?
I do not like The Matrix. I think The Matrix is bad, but that's another podcast. See, our other podcast could have worked.
I don't know if we can be friends
I
anymore.
know. I think it's horribly overrated. I don't think it's straight up bad, but like, I feel like anyone who had a freshman year philosophy textbook could have written. I feel like everyone thought The Matrix was super deep. There was nothing really deep about The Matrix. I thought it was interesting that, anyhow, I'm not going to get off on my Matrix rant, but
no, but The Matrix is a super interesting film in terms of just the filmmaking itself.
Okay, well, I'm not a filmmaker, so but getting back to this, but that questioning of what reality actually is, like, are we living in a video game simulation? Like, are we living in our own dream? Is this like people that are? There's a story. God, I wish I could remember where I read it. Maybe it was on Reddit, about somebody that was in a coma that for a couple of years or whatever, but they lived, maybe this is a movie, I don't know. They essentially lived an entire life. Like they grew up, they got married, they had kids, and then they woke up from this coma and none of it existed. And it was super difficult for them to adapt, to be like, I essentially lost my life. Like that's as bad as my wife and children dying. Cause like in my mind, I've lived with them for, 15 years or whatever it is. And so
now wait, I thought you didn't like the "it's all a dream" ending.
I don't say I'm condoning that as an ending. I'm just saying I like the idea of like, what is our actual reality? And like, how can we be 100% sure? It's that old like stoner trope of like, how do I know that you're seeing the color green, the way I'm seeing it? Yeah, we've all agreed on what green looks like, but like, how do we know when you're describing green, it's not like a rainbow color? And like for me, it looks like blue, and for somebody else, it looks purple. It looks like my purple. I mean, we just have kind of an agreed social contract that we're like, this is what green is. I don't know. That's what I thought about. Maybe I'm stoned right now. I'm not.
Okay, so first off, The Matrix is good. Mike is just wrong.
It's not.
About that. I will refer you to my previously published works on The Matrix.
There's no way. If I'm not watching that movie again, I'm definitely not reading anything about that movie. I'll go back and read my freshman year philosophy book and be like, well, that spoils all of the deep thoughts that The Matrix had.
Well, I was writing, so my work is on surround sound, and I was writing on the use of sound design in The Matrix.
I get it. It might be a well-made movie, but that doesn't interest me. And I don't want to get us off on a Matrix tangent, because there's a lot of popular movies that I don't like and a lot of unpopular movies that I love.
Yeah, that's going to be one of our other podcasts, right?
Exactly. That we'll skip for 3 weeks.
Moving off of but I did make a note about The Matrix early on when he's talking about he says like, avoid any kind of shock, but they forgot about my imagination. So this is where I was thinking, like, we've established he's worried about going to sleep because he's going to dream and somehow die. He hadn't yet established exactly how that was going to happen, because they kept delaying actually telling us that. And at that point, I was wondering if maybe like his dreams were so vivid, he was afraid like if he dies in his dream, he dies in real life. And so then I was thinking of Morpheus when he's like, if you die in the Matrix, you die in real life. The body cannot live without the mind.
I know Kung Fu.
Right.
And that is what happened. I mean, I guess it was a heart attack, but yeah, that's it.
It was the same. Like basically, if his heart got too excited in the dream, then it also apparently gave out in real life. The story that this reminded me of, since you're mentioning the Stephen King stuff, there's a story called Store of the Worlds. It's a short story, and I'm going to do a terrible job summarizing it, I'm sure. But this character like goes to somebody who like says they can give them everything they've ever wanted, but they have to give him their like most prized possession. He's like, well, let me think about it, and like goes and like is living his life and, you know, with his wife and family and blah blah blah, and like keeps thinking like, oh, I should go back there sometime. Maybe that would be worth it to get whatever the thing, you know, like the thing I ultimately want, but he kind of never has time because life gets in the way. And so he basically lives his whole life, and then at the end of the story, he like wakes up and he's like in this shack, and gives the person, you know, like I forget what it is, like a tin can and an acorn or something, which is like all the possessions he has in the world, and like goes out, and it turns out it's this post-apocalyptic wasteland, and like what he really did want most was just to like this fantasy of a normal life, and he lived this whole life in this dream in like a minute while he was in this guy's shack.
Before we get on to rating this too, there's one other, all the creepy imagery, and I haven't seen this in a while, but just, and it's not anything specific, but just the feel to this, my stomach kind of feeling to this, it kind of reminded me of like the 70s version of, or 60s version of The Wicker Man. Like just that, like
the original one?
I just felt uncomfortable the entire time. It was and like Wicker Man has a very sexual vibe to it. This is the first kind of sexual Twilight Zone that we've seen. It was just, I was not super comfortable with this one, with this episode. And thank you for making me watch it like 5 times.
The original Wicker Man. I know there was the weird Nicolas Cage remake. But the original one, like I haven't seen that in I don't know how long.
Yeah, it's been a while for me too, but it's super weird. There's a new, Kelsey and I had to stop watching it. There's a movie relatively recently called Midsommar, or like it looks like Midsummer. Mm-hmm. Have you heard of this?
Yeah.
Oh God, I haven't seen it. We couldn't make it halfway through because the imagery and that talk about a movie that feels very Wicker Man is very graphically violent and just fucking grossly weird that we couldn't make it more than like 40 minutes into it. So apparently it's very good, but we couldn't do it. So this just didn't make me feel too good.
Well, then sorry that we made you watch it 5 times. Next time we'll shoot for 6. You mentioned the sort of sexual aspects of this episode, which you're right. This is kind of the first time we've seen that come up. But even in there, it was very that I don't know if this is modern applicability, but like viewed from 2019 or 2020, I guess it is now. It's like the end of I can't even keep track of time. Christ. It's the end of January 2020. Viewed from there, it like seems super tame. But I thought it was kind of interesting. First off, that when Maya comes out front of this girly show, which we've talked about, whatever that was doing at the carnival, her dance and her dress there were like super modest, even compared to like just if you went to a carnival today, what the people are walking around at the carnival wearing is like far more revealing than what she was wearing in her like sexy girly show dance. She had like a high slit dress showing her legs, but you know, totally covered on her top, long sleeves, high neckline and everything, which I thought was just kind of an interesting, you know, it may have been, and it was like a sensual dance for sure. But that was something that like I felt kind of dated that compared to today. And then the other thing, there's a line, I think this is right before they get on the roller coaster, where he says, you know, I know this is a dream, and she confirms it's a dream, which in itself is very interesting because there's always, you know, the sort of thing when you're in a dream and it feels real, even though objectively, like if you stopped and thought about it, there are things that don't make sense and feel weird, but you're like, well, this is just how it works because in the dream it all makes sense. She says, you know, now you can do all the things you can't do when you're awake.
Yes, I forgot to write down that line.
And that was something that I was like, so it's like the sexy dancer from the girly show, which to me, the logical thing after that line would have been like, let's go do something sexual instead of let's get on a roller coaster. But also it felt like kind of a missed opportunity if we had seen that he had some sort of fantasies that he can't act out. Like maybe he's always wanted to go on a roller coaster, but he's afraid of what it would do to his heart, so he couldn't do it. Or he's always wanted to go to the girly show and afraid his heart's going to be racing and can't. And so there's this idea of like, oh, you're in the dream and you could live out whatever these fantasies are that you've had, but we haven't seen or heard that he has any fantasies. So I thought it was a really clever line, but not with the setup it would have needed to, I think, pay it off.
Well, and I mean, that couldn't have been the thing anyhow, because the fantasy is what kills him. Like, I mean, it's just the even if he knows that it's a dream and he can't hurt himself, like, and frankly, I guess the other question is, why would you want to do it then? Isn't that the whole point of extreme sports and stuff like that, is to feel your that fear and feel your adrenaline start pumping, which would have killed him.
You're like the guy from Escape Clause. As soon as he knows he can't die, like there's nothing worth living for anymore. Yeah.
So should we rate this bad boy?
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there was anything else in terms of modern applicability. This was an episode that I enjoyed while I was watching it. There were parts that were, like I said, well done, but like I came out of it like, I don't have a whole lot to say about this.
Yet we're 56 minutes into it.
Our last modern applicability thing, we've mentioned smoking in a few of these. I just love that not only does the guy with a heart condition smoke, but the doctor offers him a cigarette.
Yeah. Well, that guy was 34 going on 60.
And kids, this is what happens when you smoke.
Yeah.
That's why he looked like he was 80 years old.
So let's get to rating this thing then.
Okay. Why don't you go first?
So as I mentioned, this made me pretty uncomfortable. It was creepy. It was weird. It like reminded me of The Wicker Man and The Matrix, but with all that negative stuff going for it, it's still, I think this one was kind of it felt like one of those ones that is more of an ahead of its time episode that like did have, whether it be slow or whatever, it was kind of a neater. I could see them doing, I guess that's kind of how I've been rating these things, is can I see them doing this in 2020 and having it work? And I felt like this was kind of one that you could modernize relatively interestingly. But I didn't really want to watch it as many times as I did. So I would say I'm going to give it a 3.
I am right there with you on the 3, coming at it from a different angle. I like that perspective. Like, could you modernize this, or how would it work? I thought it was a really well made episode. I liked the writing. I thought there were some genuinely sort of interesting dialogue and interactions. I liked the rapport between the psychiatrist and Hall, as well as the whatever their relationship was between Hall and Maya. Like there were a lot of bits to it that I liked a lot, and so I didn't want to give it a low rating. But the fact that it didn't really leave me with much to think about, or have the kind of depth that some of the other Twilight Zone episodes we've seen had, I didn't want to give it a really high rating. So I kind of fell right in the middle with a 3. It's like, it's well made, it's enjoyable to watch, but this is not like, this is an episode I would probably never watch again.
Yeah, I'm glad.
Or I'll watch 4 more times over a break.
I'm glad that this was so shallow that we had nothing to say about it, and we've still filled an hour on this 22-minute episode.
We should put a disclaimer at the beginning, like, just ignore this and skip to our next episode.
No, you have to listen. You have to go along. They've been waiting. People have been waiting for weeks for this. So
I saw people out with like, picket signs in front of my office, like, where's the next Deja Reviewed?
So next week's teaser, I'm going to read you the episode title, Mark, and you have to give us a guess as to what you think it is. So next week's episode is called Judgment Night.
Well, maybe off the top of my head, that sounds like a bad, like, 80s Sylvester Stallone movie.
No, it was a 90s Dennis Leary movie, I believe.
Was it really?
Yeah, absolutely. It had a great soundtrack where they got, like, all these rock artists to collaborate with, like, these rappers, and it was a pretty cool, if I recall correctly, that was that soundtrack. It was a pretty good soundtrack and a pretty ridiculous movie where guys rent like an RV. I think Jeremy Piven's in it. They like rent an RV to go to a basketball game, and they like get lost in it's a very I would say racist movie at this point. It doesn't hold up very well because they get lost in a bad area of town, and like it's not like gangs that are stalking them, but I think like mobsters. I forget. Like they basically have to like it turns into a survival. Anyhow, don't watch.
I had to
Judgment
just
Night.
look it up because that just sounds too out
It's
there.
really-
It's Emilio Estevez, Cuba
Emilio
Gooding
Estevez.
Jr., and Dennis
Yes.
Leary. You're right.
And was Jeremy Piven in it? I believe
Jeremy Piven is in it. Yeah, I'm looking
I think
at
he
the full
just dro-
cast list.
Yeah. No.
Stephen Dorff is in it.
Okay, well, and I think it has a very good
I think
soundtrack.
one of the Blade movies.
He is Blade 2.
But the
worst special effects.
So the director was Stephen Hopkins, who I recognized his name, so I went to pull up his resume as well. He did Predator 2, Nightmare on Elm Street 5, and Blown Away, I think is probably what I recognized him from. Oh, and 24, he was one of the producers on that.
Wait, Blown Away, the Nicole Eggert gets naked Blown Away, or the other Blown Away?
The Jeff Bridges and Tommy Lee Jones.
Got it, okay. The other one's okay, I guess, too.
I think what I probably am remembering him from was 24 because I watched that show religiously for quite a while, and he was one of the EPs on that, so he would have been showing up prominently in the credits.
Cool.
All right. So anyway,
so what do you think?
So I guess my guess is that it's not a remake of that movie or a pre-make of that movie since the movie wasn't out yet. And I guess I won't guess that the movie was a remake of this episode. Judgment Night. I'm gonna say some kind of a ticking clock scenario. And I'm kind of thinking a little bit one for the Angels where like something's going to happen, somebody's going to die or something's going to happen at midnight, and somebody has like a couple hours to make a choice about how things are going to turn out.
Cool. I'm kind of excited about this one because I either wasn't super paying attention because I did accidentally glance at the description because after that title, I'm like, what the hell one could this be? Looked at the description. I'm kind of excited about this one because this will be relatively new to me because I was either distracted when I watched it, a few months back, or I'm kind of excited to put more focus into this one and take a look at it.
Well, we'll see what you say next week. Come back like, yeah, that wasn't worth it. The reason I was distracted was because the episode was terrible.
No, I from what I recall, I think it's a pretty decent episode, but we'll see. Thank you all for listening. This was Deja Reviewed.
And sorry again for missing a couple of weeks, but we are back.
Life
and hopefully you were
got in the
still
way.
able to go to the gym and get your workouts in without our podcast to listen to.
Yes. And this was Deja Reviewed. Like we just mentioned, next week's episode is episode 10 of season 1 of the Twilight Zone, and it is called Judgment Night. We'll leave the links to those to it on Netflix in the description. Please feel free to leave us a rating and a comment wherever you're listening to us, or you can send us a voicemail on the Anchor website, or you can find us at dejareviewed.com. And I hope you tune in next week, next time, whenever we're back next week. Thank you all.
Deja Review.